I'm gonna give you the secret to speed training, and we're gonna start right now. So when we're discussing speed, there's gonna be a lot of different factors that go into this. And the ultimate secret is going to be this large, oversized conceptual equation that you can take with you, that you can leave from this video and say, all right, I have a good concept, a good idea of how I need to develop this over time. So the first step that you've gotta do when you're a strength coach, when you're an athlete, is to understand the phases of sprinting, to understand from the simplest form. If we're watching the 100-meter sprint, a 60-meter sprint, if we're watching a 200, and we have to break it down into specific phases. Okay, so there's a ton of research on this. There's gonna be the start. So how quickly can you make that first step? How quickly can you get out of the blocks? And then that's gonna take us into the drive phase or acceleration. How quickly can you accelerate to top speed? How fast can you go from that starting position to top end speed? That's gonna be the drive phase max acceleration. Then there's gonna be a transition into holding maximal mechanics or max speed, okay? So those are the phases that we've got to think about. Start, the drive phase or acceleration, and then max speed, and then just slowing down the slowest, okay? Whoever can hold that max speed the longest is gonna be the best sprinter if we're looking at it through the lens of the 100-meter dash, a 200 or 60, anything along those lines. Now, the next step that we have to do as a strength coach is to understand the mechanics and to understand the actual movements and technique involved in sprinting. Okay, so we have a firm understanding or concept of the technique involved. And then the next step is to understand in the start, in the drive phase, in max acceleration, what that technique will be, and then what muscle groups need to coordinate rapidly through those different phases. And then when we get to max mechanics, max speed, and holding that max speed, what's that technique look like? And what muscles are coordinating at what speeds and what ranges, so that now we can take the lens and look at it through actual muscular physiology, and then we can start to apply that to our specific training if we're working with football players, wrestlers even, lacrosse players, soccer players, anything that's gonna be using some type of locomotion. That's the first two things that you've got to do. The next step is going to be, all right, now we understand the phases. Okay, start, drive phase / acceleration, max speed. We understand the technique used. Okay, so once we understand the technique used, then we understand the muscular physiology that goes into play. Now the next step is going to be, how can we identify for specific sports what's happening? What phases are they going to be predominantly in? If we have a baseball player and they're lefty, they hit a line drive to right field, they're going to be using the start phase to get out of the blocks, and it's going to be specific to baseball. So we have to understand now, how do they get out of the batter's box, and then how are they accelerating down first base, and then how do they make a cut at first base and accelerate to second? So now we have to start to look at it through the technique of acceleration, and even to a point, the technique of the start. And that's going to be similar to, so let's say, a wide receiver. Okay, a wide receiver, they're on the line, they're going to have a different starting position than a sprinter. So we have to train that starting position for the wide receiver, and then how are they accelerating? How are they going to decelerate into a cut and then accelerate out of that cut if they're running routes, to catch a ball or if they're blocking? So those are the key concepts that you've got to hit right away. It's got to be looked through the lens of a sprinter, understand the actual technique, understand the phases that go into 100-meter sprinting, and then pull that back and apply it to specific sports. Okay, so that takes us now into that next key concept. So we break down what are all the different moving pieces, the phases, the technique, the muscles that need to be used, the range of motion, the speed of coordination, and then we've got to go, okay, as a coach, to make it as simple as possible, there's going to be technique, okay? So there's going to be technique drills. There's going to be technique work that you can do in the weight room. There's going to be constantly refining the athlete's technique and teaching them how to move properly, not swinging their arms all over the place, flailing their head all over the place. And then along with technique, if we can think about it in a bucket, we've got the technique here, and this is something that Les Spellman does really well. So if you follow him, you're going to understand a little bit more of this, and he sort of uses these buckets where you can take technique here, and then you have power development. Think about like the engine of the athlete. Okay, so the engine of the athlete would be, how can we increase the engine size or engine power output? So that would be using technical coordination movements like a snatch, like a clean variation, like a jerk, and then and using other movements that are gonna help or that have been researched and shown to increase power related to sprinting. So a front squat, a back squat, a single leg squat, plyometric movements. So you have to look at, when you're analyzing this now, okay, where does my athlete leak? And then this contributes to the long-term formula. Then you start to use information that you can get from Cross and Bruggelli. These are guys that spent time researching in New Zealand sled work. You know, for the longest time in the United States especially, we're taught, don't do heavy sled work, it can negatively impact your technique. And we never thought, hey, why don't we do technique drills, put a load on a sled that gets us to 50% velocity decrement relative to our unweighted sprints, and use that to increase our potential ability to create a ton of power. So we've got to look at it very simply there, where we have technique here and we have power here. Now we're going to get into some of those specific movements and exercises that you can use to increase your technique or to increase your power output. And then finally, we're going to provide that big time secret at the end of this video, where you're going to be able to see a direct correlation and a direct means to profile yourself to figure out how you're leaking in certain areas and where you can improve with your technique, your power, and then obviously get faster from this information. Okay, so when we're talking about technique drills, okay, so if we think about technique exercises, power-based exercises, we have to start to change the way we think as an athlete, okay? So when I was in high school, if I wanted to run faster, okay, and I actually did have some speed because I do have longer legs and I'm relatively coordinated, I would literally just try as hard as possible, okay? I wouldn't actually think about things through that technical lens. I'd swing my arms as hard as possible. I would try to reach a little bit longer, even in the drive phase, because I thought if my stride length was longer, it would be better, I'd be faster, which is good at top end speed, but not necessarily the best thing if we're trying to accelerate. It is to a point, but not necessarily. Now, that's where the technique drills come into play. Some of the best things that you can do to improve your technique would be, you know, A skips, B skips, simple ankle dribbling, understanding how your foot should be grounding during the start and during the drive phase, okay? Those are very simple technique improvements that you can do. The other concept that we have to understand here is that when we're training to improve our speed, and if you watch a 100-meter sprinter, we see it as normal people that they're just sprinting down the track, okay? But much like swimming, what actually is happening is that these athletes know exactly how many strides that they're gonna take to get through the start, into the drive, into the max speed, okay? They know exactly how many strides they're taking throughout the entire 100 meters. So one of the things that we can learn from that world is, now going back and thinking about a wide receiver or, you know, somebody who has planned movements, how many steps do I take until I hit a cut? And then learn that technique to accelerate, decelerate, accelerate again quickly. So we want to learn that technical mindset that the best sprinters like Shelly Ann Fraser-Price, like Elaine Hara-Thompson, learn what they do and they understand and how they see sprinting mechanics and sprinting technique. So A skips, B skips, ankle drilling, and along with the heavier sled pulls, sprinting on hills is phenomenal. It's one of the best ways that you can improve your speed is to just sprint on a hill. Okay, find a hill, learn how to accelerate and accelerate rapidly and think about a high knee drive and a forward lean. Those are the key places where you can start to improve your technique, because most sports are going to be specifically focused on starting and acceleration. So that's the first takeaway here for specific application is going to be A skips, B skips, ankle dribbling, a whole bunch of other technical things, but sprint with a sled behind you and sprint on a hill. Okay, that's the first takeaway. Now we're gonna get into some of those specific power movements and other isolation exercises that you can directly take to feed the ultimate formula that we're gonna provide at the end. Okay, so we went over the technique bucket. Now we can go into the movements that increase the size of that power bucket. And it comes back to, you know, what's the twitch force that an athlete can have so that they can execute the technique as powerful as possible. Okay, so that we understand the technique that goes into, you know, we don't wanna be flailing our arms all over the place. We wanna execute, you know, skipping drills and ankle dribbling as effectively as possible. We wanna understand things like a hip lock, which we're gonna go over here in shortly. But if we wanna focus strictly now on power development, the first place to start is gonna be with technical coordination movement. So a lot of coaches, and this is the most appalling thing that I hear is to increase power, let's do deadlifts. Like, we can do this with deadlifts. No, we don't use deadlifts to get faster. I know Louis Simmons might say otherwise, but if we're using back squats, single leg squats, front squats, and those are gonna be simple strength movements that transfer really well to power development, we can also do that in conjunction with technical coordination movements like a high hang snatch, like a 2-box power snatch, like a power snatch from the floor, like a power clean, a high hang clean. These are exercises that are gonna light up our posterior chain. They're gonna teach us how to have force absorption. They're gonna change our technical mindset. Remember what we talked about. When you have a world-class sprinter, they have every technical issue figured out. They know their stride length. They know how many strides they need to take through different phases. A lot of coaches shy away from teaching the technique of weightlifting movements like snatches and like cleans, and then they forget that it leads to greater mobility, greater ankle mobility. If we have better ankle mobility, we have better positions for acceleration. If we absorb a clean, we learn dynamic trunk control, and that transfers over really well to power development. That also leads to better control with our technique. Okay, so use technical coordination movements and squats and front squats and single leg squats. And now we're gonna get into some of these other specific movements that are reflexive that will teach you how to accelerate really well. And it's almost a combination of technique and power that come together into these unique movements, along with some really, really good plyometric exercises that you can use to increase your horizontal power development, which will lead to helping you run faster. And then finally, that formula reveal at the end, that's gonna teach you how you can take all these concepts and just run with it on your own. What's up, everybody? Before we continue with today's video, do you feel like you're struggling as a coach? You can't put together a really good program to help your athletes achieve greatness, but you still want to improve. You want to become a better coach. That's exactly why we put together the Sports Performance Bible book and video course, where we have 9 chapters plus B-sides, and we dive deep into all things around programming, periodization, athlete reactive analysis, technical coordination, absolute strength, all of these different factors that'll help you accomplish all of your goals. Head over to GarageStrength.com today and pick up the Sports Performance Bible. Now, back to today's video. Okay, so think about if we have a body, right? We get them extremely strong. We get them to back squat 500 pounds. Let's use Nicholas Singleton, the 2021 Gatorade Player of the Year for football. Back squat over 500 pounds, okay? Can single leg squat over 400 pounds. That's great, but we have to play the game of technique over here, max strength over here, and then in this range is going to be power development and then speed of coordination. So we need to understand technique, execute technique as well as possible, and then increase that speed of coordination as rapidly as possible so that he can link the technique with his severe strength that he has over here. And by doing things like cleans, that moves down that spectrum closer to technical execution. And then, or we go, back squats would be over on the right side, and then we come down a little more to the technical coordination movements like cleans, and then we get even closer to what we're gonna show you here, and that's gonna be reflexive strength movements. So when we're doing reflexive strength movements, now we have to react even faster. So a clean with Nicholas's case might be done at 147 kilos, which is about 325 at 1.7 meters per second. That's extremely fast, okay? What that means though is that now, okay, he's really, really quick. Now we also have to keep improving that through these reflexive movements. So a reflexive exercise is gonna be a little bit more advanced. I'm gonna grab a 25, go a little bit lighter. So this would be a good example of where we can understand different concepts of actual speed and technique. We might start off with just a simple dumbbell snatch to a hip lock here, okay? So we wanna focus on our ankles, knees, and hips all at 90 degrees, and force absorption here from an acceleration point, okay? So you wanna think here a little bit quicker. This is along that line, along the spectrum, we're getting closer and closer to the rate of coordination of actually sprinting. Okay, so the next step might be drop, up, okay? So here, drop, up. Now we're getting force absorption. Now we can play the game with a box, okay? So we're here, boom, boom, okay? We wanna go a little bit quicker. And then we can even get to the point where if we're here, and this is gonna help us with cutting. So we're here, thinking forward with our chest. Forward with our chest, that's gonna help recruit our posterior chain, our glutes, Our glutes are the biggest muscle in our body, and they're gonna be responsible for a lot of power, a lot of acceleration. So we're here, boom, forward, okay? Boom. So these movements, along with some of the plyometrics we're gonna show you, are key to working down that power spectrum into the technical realm, and that's gonna help you increase your speed. Okay, so when we're talking about increasing our horizontal ability to project, okay, acceleration, horizontal power is what we need to be fast. Okay, so there's been a recent study that has come out where they studied, not we, they studied, the scientists studied sprinters, and they measured a sprint on one day with a specific warm-up that did not include plyometrics. Okay, then the next day, they measured their sprint after they did a plyometric warm-up. So plyometrics being jumping ability, bilateral jumping ability, and then what did that do for their sprinting capability relative to the previous day? And what they saw was when they did plyometric movements, they were drastically faster, okay? Like statistically significant faster. That's a key concept. So when we're doing things like plyometrics, this is going to feed into both the power and the technique buckets. So that's where the transfer of training is gonna be a little bit higher. So we have to understand how to use plyometrics in training, how frequently, without beating our athletes up, can we use contrast methods and things like that that we've discussed in videos in the past, and then what specific movements help increase actual sprinting ability or speed-based ability on the football field, on the soccer pitch, or wherever, you know, basketball, whatever you're playing. We'll show you here is 2 exercises. I'll try to show you, don't judge me too much, but what I want to demonstrate here is like, if we're a defensive lineman, let's pretend we're a defensive end. Okay, and we call these whiz jumps into single leg bounds. And I would even recommend single leg bounds and bilateral bounds are like the best things that you can do from a plyometric perspective to increase your overall speed. And it's cheap, it's free. You can go out to a field and just use your body weight. And this is a great exercise for even wrestlers to increase the speed of their single leg, their shots, okay, on the offensive. Now, if I'm in this position, this is gonna be specific to the start, and it's gonna be specific to acceleration or the drive phase. So I'm gonna be here, I'm gonna give me a little rock, and I'm gonna jump through here. Don't judge me too much. Boom. Okay, so you can do each side, each side 5 sets. That's gonna drastically improve your start and your acceleration. So that's gonna lead a little bit to both of those buckets. And now, if you have access to dumbbells, if you're in a weight room, you could do, hoping my mic doesn't pull my pants down. You go here, 1, 2, 3. Notice I was there in about a quarter squat position. I'll rest about 30 seconds. Here, and then you can just line up, you get 20 yards, 10, 15 yards here. Okay, so now that's gonna help our start, and it's gonna help our ability to recruit quickly. If we can recruit quickly, and we know the technique that we need to recruit in, now we have a large amount of power development, of force development, that leads to horizontal projection with really good technique. So this is gonna take us into that next key concept behind the secret of speed training. Okay, so the final piece here before we get into discussing how you guys can use all of this together is to understand bodybuilding and isolation movements do play a role in increasing power development and understanding technical execution. So using simple movements like we call them here the hamstring pulls, or a lot of people will call them the Nordic hamstring exercise, Nordic hamstring curl. I believe that movements like that are phenomenal isolation movements that lead to increased coordination, increased rate of coordination. And we will do them for different positions. We'll do them with different chest angles, and we'll even do razor hamstring curls, which lead to a tremendous amount of posterior chain coordination and recruitment. That's gonna be my #1 factor with bodybuilding movements, with isolation movements. Don't shy away from them. Use the hamstring pulls in different angles. Another movement that we like to use is just a simple dumbbell RDL, okay? And you can go from here, even all the way up to a hip block here. And you can notice I'm a little off balance, so I have to use some dynamic trunk control to improve these positions, but that's gonna be somewhat of a bodybuilding / isolation movement. And then finally, we can use, this is a movement I'm not that good at because I don't extend my hips as well here. Oh. Oh, you can see there, my hips are too low. So we want to have hip extension with knee flexion, and that's going to use all three heads of your hamstrings to coordinate them effectively. So there's a place for bodybuilding movements, for isolation movements, even trunk exercises like V-up presses, med ball slams, explosive movements that are isolation focused transfer really well to speed-based training. Now remember, with all of this discussion, okay, we have power development, we have technique, we have technical drills that come in, A skips, B skips, wicket runs. We've got a whole video on wicket runs, okay? Hill-based training. Those are key factors that you can do the drills, the skips, almost daily. You can do simple skipping drills, simple technical walkthroughs daily. You can do things like hill runs probably once or twice a week. Wickets, once or twice a week, okay? And you understand how to set up those wickets effectively. That's gonna improve your technique. Then over here, max strength movements, back squat, front squat, single leg squat. Then technical coordination movements, power snatch, high hang snatch, power clean. Learn the technique, get a technical mindset. Then you come in even further. Now we're at the reflexive movements, okay? Reflexive movements. Now we're meeting closer to where we need to be. Reflexive movements are here. Plyometric movements are here. Now we're even closer. And then that final key area that we need to be at is where can we unite this? And that's where the Cross and Brughelli study that I mentioned earlier, what they found is that they could create different percentages of sled work and sled loads to improve an athlete's ability to create horizontal power, to increase their running ability. So what they found was, okay, let's run a 20-meter sprint, 20-meter sprint unloaded, okay? So now what they found is one of the best things to do is to cater back and say, okay, let's attach a sled to this athlete. Let's say somebody can run 20 miles an hour, or it's just 10 meters per second, simple math here. What we can do is come back and say, what weight is on the sled for that individual to run 10 miles an hour? What rate is on the sled to make that individual's speed 5 meters per second instead of 10 meters per second? So they found that's sort of like that sweet spot, and now you can profile that athlete or the individual and figure out, okay, let's play with this. Let's see if they do better, or let's see if they're really, really weak. That load might be a little bit lower. They have poor power development, okay? That load might be really low to decrease that position to 50% load decrement or 50% velocity decrement. If they're stronger, meaning they have really good weight room numbers, but they have poor technique in sprinting, that load might be higher, and they have to go really slow to focus on actually executing proper technical movement. They have a large engine, but they have a poor comprehension of technique. Now, one of the issues here is that a lot of people don't have access to the equipment to do that. So what I recommend as a simple tool is using a single leg squat. So we'll do a single leg squat where our rear leg's elevated and we touch our knee to a pad. Okay, so we're here and it would look almost like this, and then you come back up, but our back leg is actually on a stable position. So we'll touch our knee to the pad and come up. What I like to use is sit there and say, start at 25 to 30% of that single leg squat. So if you hit a PR of 250 pounds for a triple, that's your heaviest you've ever single leg squatted. Now you can drop down to, 50% of 250 would be 125 pounds. Another drop down would be about 95 to 100 pounds on the sled. Start even lower, I would say 75 to 100 pounds, and now you can play around with that. See how that transfers well into your training, because you're not going to have access to the technology that these guys had to run these experiments. You're at home, you're training on your parents' street, you're training in your parents' garage. You've got to figure this out. You've got a cheaper sled, so you can start around 75 pounds, see how you feel when you're doing that, see how you feel, the next day. Are you extremely sore? Where are you sore at? Then use that as a guide, and then you can slowly build up. Maybe you get to 100 pounds. But start light, understand technique, use A skips, B skips, wicket runs, use hill sprints, and then over here again, going back over it. Max strength movements, technical coordination movements, reflexive movements, some isolation exercises, plyometric movements, and then when the worlds unite, okay, between technique and strength, it's gonna be all based around that sled exercise. Start with about 25 to 30% of your best single leg squat for 3, figure that out, and then work from that point and see how that transfers over to your speed realm and how you produce speed in your specific sport. So if you need help with that, click on the link down below. We've got a How to Get Faster speed-based training program that can help you learn and increase your speed overall that we've put together. We've tried this and use all these methods on a lot of our top-notch football players, including Nick Singleton. And remember guys, when you're in the weight room, you've always got to remember to cultivate your power. Peace.